Africa Next, where voting is underway in Kenya's controversial repeat presidential election. While people went to vote, there were reports of sporadic violence in many areas. Kenyan police clashed with the opposition supporters, where they were burning barricades, and gangs of youth prevented voting in some towns in an election rerun. They were seeking to challenge the credibility of President Uhuru Kenyatta's expected victory. Full voting in one of Kenya's largest slums in Nairobi was interrupted when protesters barricaded the roads leading to polling stations. The protesters also clashed with the police, forcing security personnel to fire tear gas to disperse the protesters.
Sio sawa, lakini wamenyima hata wengine haki yao kupiga kura, sababu station shingine hakutapigwa kura, na iko mtu anataka kupiga kura lakini hawezi enda wapi, hawezi enda huko. Lakini pahali yule mtu wako nafasi ya kupiga kura na anajua ile kitu anafanya Kenya, kama ni mzalendo wa Kenya, anastahili apige kura.
Meanwhile, President Kenyatta urged the people to shun violence and go out and vote.
This evening I speak to you not as president. I say that after you vote, and I have said this before, please go home. Go back to your neighbor. Remember that in spite of their origin, your neighbor is your brother. Your neighbor is your sister. How you have voted, or for that matter, not voted, should not change the manner in which you relate to everyone else in our Kenyan family. Let us all maintain peace as we exercise our constitutional right to choose.
Well, meanwhile, the opposition candidate Raila Odinga has now called on his supporters to join him in boycotting the election, saying he would lead a campaign of civil disobedience. He's refusing to participate in the contest because he says the Election Commission has failed to implement reforms to prevent it from being marred by irregularities.
Convince your friends, neighbors, and everyone else not to participate. Instead, we advise Kenyans who value democracy and justice to hold vigilant prayers away from polling stations or just stay at home. We are aware that the bloodthirsty regime is planning to use every excuse to massacre our people. Let us deny them that chance.
Odinga spoke shortly after the Supreme Court said it was unable to consider a last-minute appeal to delay the vote after 5 out of 7 judges failed to turn up. The Supreme Court ordered the repeat election after annulling an August 8th presidential election, which Odinga had lost. The Supreme Court was unable to hear the petitions to delay the vote. The election official said it would go ahead, regardless of Odinga's decision. Supporters of Odinga has now welcomed his call to boycott the repeat election. Odinga's supporters marched through the streets of Kisumu after Kenya's Supreme Court's decision. The right police used tear gas to disperse them in the opposition stronghold. In a slum in Nairobi, protesters set fire to tires as Odinga was addressing a rally in Uhuru Park, where he called for people to boycott the vote. Odinga, however, was backed away from previous promises to hold large-scale protests on Election Day.
Baba is fighting for us. He is fighting for our rights, for our grandfather that didn't get, so we want to get it now. So I don't think it's really fair for us to be denied our rights. That's why we cannot vote tomorrow. And as Baba just said, we need to be home, calm, and wait for the best.
Well, meanwhile, the United States has urged all Kenyans to remain calm, reject the violence, and uphold the principles of their constitution this election. The spokesperson on Heather Nauert in a press meet said, "We are deeply concerned about the continuing efforts of both parties to interfere with and undermine the independent operation of the Electoral Commission, the judiciary, and other essential institutions." She also said now is a time for strife to divide Kenya is not the time. It is a time for all Kenyans to come together. Vimal Shah, an Indian Kenyan, now joins us from Nairobi with the very latest on this. The political and election violence isn't new to Kenya, and yet the events over the last few weeks have made world headlines. How is the situation developing in Kenya?
This is a party called Jubilee, which is one unified party, which has got all the tribes in there. The other one is a coalition. So that's where the problem is. And yeah, we did have an election. It was won by one party, declared as president, and then the Supreme Court sort of annulled it and said it's not proper. And the Supreme Court gave clear directions that within the next 60 days, you need to run another election. The direction was given to the IEBC, which is the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission, an independent body to run the elections. They ran it last time. The voting was all okay. It was done. I also voted.
Right.
And as far as the voting was concerned, it was all okay. It was only the counting that they talked about and the process of transmitting the results. It's like I'm transmitting to you right now. Same way they said the transmission had a problem. So that was annulled, and they've called for another election before November 1st. They need to have the next election. Now, IEBC looked at it. Earlier, they'd given a date of October 17th, and they changed the date to October 26th and says on 26th of October, we'll have the election. And it was more about two people, the president and the runner-up, Raila Odinga. And another court order came in from another justice saying that you have to include the Third Way Alliance because they were part of the process where they had appealed also. So they were allowed, and since they were allowed, the IEBC took a decision to say, allow all the presidential candidates. There's 7 candidates now on the ballot box.
Vimal, will there be an election, though, on the 26th? The likelihoods, in your opinions?
One party, the Jubilee Party, which is the current incumbent president, is saying elections will be held, still campaigning and saying we should go to the polls. The other party's main contender, Raila Odinga, has written a letter to say that I am withdrawing from this election until my conditions are met. There are some sort of, I think, 28 or 30 different conditions they had given him and said these are non-negotiable minimums that we want to get done. Out of those, I think most of them are done except for 5 or 6. 5 or 6 that were not done are the resignation of some people out there, changing the number of people and the people out there who's CEO of IEBC and all these other guys. That's not all that's not happened. So right now there's a dilemma. There's one side that says we will go to the polls, we have the elections. The other side is saying we won't allow you to go to the polls.
Vimal, what about the Indian community there in that region in Kenya? How are they impacted? What is the word on the street, on the ground, the mood, given all the recent violence there as it pertains to this election? Vimal?
We're about 46 million people in Kenya. Probably 47 right now, I'm not sure. Out of that, about 60,000, 70,000 Indian origin. So even if you were to work your decimal points, it's not even 1%, right? Yes, we're here, we're significant in that sense, but you know, we're also local now. So the Indian community is not a targeted community. We've integrated well with the people here. And I'm born, brought up here. My father's born and brought up in Mombasa, so in Kenya. And we've been here more than 100 years now. So it's not something strange. The Indian community is a business community. They work. There's a lot of expatriates too from India who do work here. And yes, we have our community affairs. We have our Diwali, fireworks going on. All that stuff's going on. And I don't think we're a targeted community. I think we're doing quite okay. However, these disruptions and the obstruction to flow for goods and services does affect everyone.
And Vimal, do you see a role for New Delhi in Nairobi's affairs?
The Indian is very short-termism. It's about money now. Chinese are very long-term, and they're here to grow. And China 1, I was in China at a conference. China 1 was about coming into Africa and taking all the minerals. Okay? China 2 was coming in and doing infrastructure, and they've done a lot of infrastructure here.
Right.
And now they're on China 3. And this is important to note that they're now coming and saying, hang on, we need to go in and buy operating companies in Africa and really have operations there, start companies. And if you go and Google CAD Fund is a China Africa Development Fund. They've got something like $12 billion available for Chinese entrepreneurs to put that money in as equity. So if a Chinese guy says, I want to do something in Kenya, he doesn't have the money for it. The CAD Fund will give him equity to put into that project. So there's a lot of funding going on with the Chinese, state-led, obviously, state-led. And of course, in China, you've got to be politically correct, otherwise you can't operate anywhere else in the world. India doesn't do that.